Angel, are you in the room? I think you are, yes. Okay, this is your question. It's a detailed one, so it's good. So you can respond to the answer that you hear from our esteemed panel. So, clause 65.2, NEC 3 clearly states that the assessment of compensation is not revised if the forecast turns out to be wrong. That clause seems to have been replaced in NEC 4 with 66.3. The assessment of implemented compensation is not revised except as stated in these conditions of contract. Some people might construe the revised clause as leaving the door open to reassessing CEs once implemented under some circumstances. Was it necessary to make that qualification under NEC 4, especially after the impact of my favourite case, the Northern Ireland versus Healthy Buildings, on how NEC provisions may be interpreted by the courts after the event? In the view of that legal development, should NEC not have taken the opposite approach of reinforcing that no revision can be made in order to bulletproof the intent of the contract, i.e. to avoid opening up a CE once implemented? Great question. John, let's start with you, and then I'll come to Nicola after that.
We agree, that's nice.
Interact, then.
I'll just get first.
Yeah, you go.
No, just get first, John. As you just said, yeah, that's good. No problem. So I think to be honest, I disagree that it changes really the NEC3 position. I don't see that having except as stated in these conditions the contract is really opening it up that much. Perhaps if you start putting a load of Z clauses in, it might do. In both the NEC3 and NEC4, you've got a compensation event if the project manager's assumption is wrong, and that's when you can open that up. And otherwise, you have the right to adjudicate. And so, as far as I'm aware, that's what those conditions of contract are referring to. So, sort of the lawyer's answer there is potentially it doesn't really change. Was it necessary to make that qualification under NEC 4 after non-healthy buildings? Then possibly. Well, maybe I'll leave that one for John.
Well, but my view is that, like a lot of things in Section 6, there are a lot of little refinements which were minor improvements, but there wasn't necessarily a problem with the existing words in NEC 3. And this for then falls under that. So if you looked at what was the event's not revised if the forecast turns out to be wrong, well, that means that, does that mean that there's other reasons why it could be revised? Yeah. Well, here it's stating it positively. There's got to be an express reason in the contract why it could be opened up again. So Nicola's mentioned the change in an assumption. You could argue a change decision might apply if, which is 60.18, if the contractor can demonstrate that the assessment they've made is manifestly wrong in accordance with the rules of the contract. And rather than going to adjudication when you both agree that it's manifestly wrong, the project manager just changes their decision and says, I made a mistake. For me, it's more precise. So I don't really see what the Northern Ireland court case has to do with it, to be honest.
Am I right in saying that the only place in the conditions of contract where it can be changed, that is in the W clause, that's in the dispute resolution clause?
There's the assumptions, dispute resolution.
The assumptions won't change this compensation again, people will just kick off another compensation.
Yeah.
That's quite important to know that.
Yeah.
Maybe change decision, I suppose that's possible.
Yeah. And you could always have a compensation in on top of a compensation in. So additional work has been instructed, and then you, find physical conditions which you didn't expect or whatever. That was always the case, yeah? But there's got to be another, is it a compensation in yes or no, before another compensation in the process and assessment is kicked off. So I think it's an improvement. I think it's more precise.
Angel, great question. Happy with that? Anything to add? Or?
Yeah, appreciate that. Not entirely agree from my experience.
That's good.
Yeah.
I've worked in disputes and I've seen a massive change on sites used in NEC 4 against NEC 3 just because of that. So there is some arguments about, now it says exact. So, that's going to try to find, a reason why.
I think John is quite right. The only thing I can think of is a change decision by the PA. And the change decision compensation maybe is one we've argued over quite often.
Me and Rob's not here anymore, but me and Rob Bourne had a really good argument about that, which somehow got Rob Gerrard and then Peter Higgins involved in it.
It's always good.
Yeah, but that's one which that's really where it could be used is the project manager realises they haven't assessed it in accordance with the contract, and rather than going for the dispute process when they're both in agreement, it just changes. He or she just changes the decision.
Sounds like we've got a paper that we need to write between us. So,
Get to it.
Yeah, off the back of the group. Okay, great. Question 2. This is from Sarah Shute, who told that I've got to apparently say she was top of the leaderboard. And it was Sarah on her own, not Sarah and John. So Sarah said, what is the one thing that you would like to see everyone in the room do with any NEC contract starting today? And this is her words, not mine. No glib answers from the panel. So we'll go along. We'll start with Neil and just work along the panel. So 30 seconds each. If you want one thing this room to be doing from today, what would that be? Into a microphone, please.
Try to convince project managers that it's a good idea to accept the program is less than perfect. It'll never be perfect. Is it good enough? Remember, 3 functions of the program. Number 1, progress. And what is the end date saying? Number 2, we use it to assess compensation events. Number 3, we use it to coordinate different people's activities. So is it fit for purpose for those functions? Is the question. So that'd be my advice.
Okay.
I think one can almost follow on from that a little bit and just say make sure you've got that first accepted program in your contract data when you sign the contract.
Okay. Some people here will know what I'm going to say. My one-line NEC training clause, I'm very sorry. Read the chuffing contract, chuffing talk and listen to each other, and then do what it says in the chuffing contract. It's very simple.
Mine would be consciously think about and agree how you set up and start up the contract in terms of people, the systems, the organisation.
Yeah.
So that you can do mutual trust and cooperation rather than it's just a behaviour. It's embedded in the fabric of how it's set up.
Thanks, John. You just pinched mine. There we are. So I would guys simply call it workshop practice. That's the number one thing that is just as really John has said. You can have all those wonderful processes, absolutely useless if we don't implement them in terms of having the right resources on both sides and understand, Richard mentioned, read the contract. It's amazing how many training sessions I do, and I have a couple of little questions. One is, have you seen the contract data? No. Have you read the scope? No. How long have you been going? 6 months. I have absolutely no idea what people are managing at that particular point. But I think that working practice, absolutely key and critical.
Okay, I think I'm allowed one as well. So my thing I want everyone to do is every project has to be using a cloud-based administration tool to manage the flow of communications on your project. You have in this room Digital Beehive, we have Think Project and CMAR, you've got RPC with their new solution within Unifier. You would be amazed how often I'm still going into doing training for organisations where they're using emails, registers, pro formas. This is 2023, everyone, and how on earth can you be managing jobs via emails and who's got the register, where's it gone? These systems are so simple and relatively inexpensive. Well, they'll tell you they're inexpensive, but they will. Whatever they're charging you, they are going to pay for themselves 10 times over. I do fear sometimes certain clients don't want to do it because they don't want that exposure of how bad maybe they're administering. That's not a generalisation. Contractors and clients can be very bad at this. But you've got to have a cloud-based system this day and age to be managing that flow of communications. We should not be doing jobs on emails and registers and such like that. And by the way, contractors, if you're using a system with a client, don't forget you're allowed to use the system with your subcontractors. We did a poll in the LinkedIn group, and that was by no means the sort of regular occurrence. So these cloud-based systems are providing efficiency, transparency, clarity, auditability, and making just things more efficient that would help the management of the flow of NEC communications. So, Sarah, do you think there was any glib answers amongst that lot?
1 or 2.
Mine was glib, I'm sorry.
But you know me, I've got high expectations.
Okay.
No, those are really interesting.
Can I just say that whilst Glenn has got the sponsors in the room, Glenn is not directly on commission.
Yet. Okay, question 3. Mark's in the room, I think. Mark Hattrick, right? Yeah, Mark's over there. Increasingly, we are finding project managers, upon receiving a clause 32 for acceptance, are using the 2-week period for assessment to pick out tasks that have not happened in those 2 weeks, and then stating the programme is unrealistic. For most intelligent people, this would seem unreasonable behaviour by the project manager, but they still quote this in rejections. Other than confrontation, what advice could the panel offer? Surely that doesn't happen. Raise your hand if you've ever seen that. Anyone? Surely not. Oh, okay, proudly. Barry, and then I'll come to you, Neil. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's clearly not the intention, isn't it, to operate that way. And it has kind of made me thought in terms of some of the amendments where there just needs to be, doesn't need to be reinforced, you're assessing that programme at that moment in time. It's not some later point to find excuses in terms of not accepting the programme. So it is, it's a problem. Yeah, I don't know, Neil, what do you think in terms of...
Other than confrontation.
Yeah. It's difficult, isn't it? I think that's ultimately not being reasonable in terms of actually managing the programme.
Exactly, I think PM is clearly acting unreasonably.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes the right thing to do is to confront bad behaviours.
Yeah.
And challenge that. And if you don't get any truck with the PM, that's when you go to the client. Maybe you do an informal, hello client, this is a problem to us, kind of mini senior reps if you like. How does it get you anywhere, formalise senior reps? People forget these magic words, contract, mutual trust and cooperation, do not mean that we're always going to agree with each other. It isn't anti-collaborative, sorry to use the C word, but it's not anti-collaborative to say you disagree with somebody. Is it? Sure enough. No, that's what I would do.
Yeah. As we talked about earlier, it's not a bad idea at the start of a project to actually have a discussion about what you're going to do if you start seeing unreasonable behaviour. Let's have it open out, talk about that at the start. And then, as Neil said, you're going to go to the PM's boss, you're going to go to the client, you're going to have a word, aren't you? Because you can't run a project like that.
As a contractor, I think you should definitely push back on that, and I think John's going to make a point as well about.
Yeah. Do you think that if you don't have an acceptable programme which people can't manage the contract from, can't assess compensation links from, that it might affect the increasing of the prices or delay completion or impair the performance of the works in use? Well, that could possibly be an early warning then, which if the client who has access on Glenn's point, access to the cloud-based contract management system, starts seeing those things, then perhaps they might have a word with their project manager.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of education to be done in relation to the programme. And Richard, remember, we went to Belfast a few years ago. Yeah, there we are. We stand on an NEC break, of course. So, but it was amazing because I always remember that we had somebody stand up as we started and we started talking about the programme, and somebody stood up and basically said, I've been an engineer for 45 years, I've never accepted a programme, I'm never going to accept a programme. And I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding and myths about the programme that we've really got to try and dispel. Because without an accepted programme in place, what on earth we might? If you're a PM, how can you be a PM without a programme?
The thing is now better about NEC4. We've got that lovely little bit at the end of 63.5. It's absolutely black and white. We have to update the programme to the dividing date to assess the compensation. And therefore, if we don't bother to update the programme as we go along, all we're doing is creating for both sides more hassle in updating that programme further for every single compensation then. So everybody in the room, every side should recognise that it's in everybody's interest to get the accepted programme. And that's a strong thing that's coming across today.
Mark, anything to add to that? I don't know if there's a microphone up.
Not really sure that there's much advice there, to be honest, but what we actually might do, but it's still quite clear to me that in those contracts the project manager just doesn't want to accept the programme. It doesn't matter what we do, he's just not going to accept it. And I think we, as a contractor, have to come to terms with that, and we have to decide what we're going to do about it. Unfortunately, within our own organisation, we have a sort of spectrum of opinions about what that might be, and as just a lonely planner, my voice doesn't count for too much. So.
Someone please give him a hug. Don't forget, I mean, the problem is, Mark, you can't make anyone do what the contract says. Like anything, if someone's not doing what the contract says, that's dispute process. You can notify a compensation event under 60.1 brackets 9 for rejecting something for not a valid reason. Now, that's not one to claim money against, it's just to up the ante and get that in there. And if you start doing that every time, then they start to get bored and maybe think about that. So, yeah, you can't legislate for idiots.
Incompetence.
Okay, well, we'll work on that as a group, try and emphasise things. We have done, what is in here for the client to reject a programme? Why do they want to reject a programme anyway is the bigger question. Okay, is Miles in the room? Miles in the room? Yes, okay. So Miles asked this question. The GDPR is commonly used by contractors as blocker for carrying out defined cost audits of costs. What is the panel advice on how to deal with this, and should the schedule of cost components be defined clearly to make this process easier for NEC 5? So, Neil, we'll let you start with that, and then we'll go to Richard.
So 2 weeks ago I was the expert on cyber security. This week is GDPR. Thanks, Dan. Luckily, I know how to use Google.
Okay.
And then luckily I found the NEC practice note on this subject. So that's the start, is look up the practice note 3. And actually, and I'm not an expert in GDPR. If anybody is in the room, please, feel free to contribute. But I read the practice note, and it confirmed what I thought was always true and what I'd been told previously, that actually complying with the basic requirements in the contract, you are not processing personal data. You're not a data processor, okay? So, according to the practice note, and comparing that to things I've been told in the past, that the contractor cannot refuse to disclose that information, okay? Now, you have to be careful with it. See, the law is one thing, but relationships are another thing. And often the most contentious information in there is information related to staff salaries, their bonuses, their overtime payments, and all the rest of it. It's always pay and rations that cause a problem. So it's sensible to agree checks and balances that obviously allow to inspect records, not take records, not have copies of records, inspect them. So agree that a small number of people are allowed to do that to protect everybody's interest, but strictly speaking under GDPR, not necessary.
I think it's a really good answer. I'm not an expert in GDPR at all. I'd like to say to the contractor, sorry mate, you signed up to this contract, you've got to do what it says in the contract. And no doubt the contract says we have got to show individual salary. And this is a real issue now also, everybody, for the PSC. PSC option C and E, we've got defined cost of consultants. Heaven forbid they want people from Montmedal to tell everybody their salary. Bloody hell, shocking, shock horror, NEC 4. And what we say, at the very least, is that we do need at least some level of confidentiality agreement, which isn't prescribed in the ECC. But as Neil has just said, it would be absolutely logical to make it very clear that that information is confidential, and as Neil has said, to keep it to a small set of people. But that's not explicit clearly in the ECC.
Absolutely, yeah.
I honestly don't know. I'd love a lawyer or somebody to tell me, is it really a defence? Is the contractor breaking the other thing I've been told, I've never actually checked it, but I've been told that in our personal conditions of engagement, our company has made it clear that they can give that information out to somebody in this sort of situation.
I think you're right as well, Richard, to point out the issue with the professional service contracts. Clients usually don't have their own resource to check cost information. So who do they get to check the consultant's cost information? Another consultant
wants to know the salary.
So there's an even bigger challenge there. Now I think that's a bit naff this out really, because consultants have sat there in their ivory towers for years doing, yes, come on contractors, share all this information with us. And as soon as they're told to do it, they all run to the hills and no, we're not ready for this. But you can understand there are some commercial pressures there that don't exist between necessarily contractors and consultants.
Miles, thoughts on that?
Yes, sort of experience I had asked this when I've done NEC on cost audits, and I've had this issue come up saying, we can't show you our salaries and can't show you our bonuses because it's confidential information. As AM, what do you do if a contractor says to you, we're not going to show you this information? They then go to the client and say, what they to be unreasonable, trying to make us breach GDPR. Should there be a sanction or something in the contract? NEC 5 says if contractors don't provide that information.
So disallowed cost, is that you know, should be the record.
Hold on, before we go down that route. You can't not pay for people you know have been working on the job.
But that's the problem.
So you have to come up with a fair and reasonable assessment of what you think is a reasonable amount to pay for those people that you know have been working.
But I was involved in one project for the contractor, and the contractor's QS couldn't get head office to open up their books, as in someone visiting and open up, they were just refusing. Or the project manager, and this is where I was working for the contractor, but I thought the project manager was actually quite justified in this, because the project manager said, well, I can't see it, I'm going to make it pessimistic, at the pessimistic end of what I pay them. So he made a pessimistic assessment, which was something like, 30% less than what head office was saying. And somebody, no, hang on, it's only minus 15%, yeah? Now, so he's doing that, saying what's at the lower end of the realistic or reasonable assessment. Suddenly the contractor opened up their books. Funny that, yeah.
But the other thing is if the contract already contains a clause dealing with illegal or impossible requirements.
Yeah.
So issue a notice under that, you think there is an illegal requirement, we request of you, and then justify your case. Get a letter from a lawyer to explain in detail why this is illegal. Maybe that's a start.
Quick one from there, see at the front. Someone give her a microphone.
Do we have that GDPR expert in the room? Leslie.
Interestingly, I've been spending the last 5 months wrestling with this on the alliance contract. So, my understanding, speaking to the DPOs, which are the GDPR experts that each company has, is that if there is a lawful basis for processing, then it's okay. But you need that in your contract. So if you've got the audit clause, what we had in the alliance contract, and this is relevant to everybody else as well, is we're not a single legal entity, which means that it goes from partner A to partner B to partner C when we're in that central PMO office, and the GDPR implications around that get quite complicated. What we had to do was get an additional data sharing agreement, which gave us our lawful basis for processing, because our alliance contract wasn't sufficient. I think, although everybody's contract is different, even though it's standard, you should be using your lawful basis for processing, but then putting some caveats on for your audit, so you're using your data principles, you're minimising that. You're not sending it to everybody, you're sending it on encrypted sites, etc. You're only sending it to 3 people, things like that. But the area where you need to be really careful, and I think this is an area that we see more in scope than in commercial, is special category data. So we've got 2 types of data: ordinary personal data, which is okay, it's people's salaries, people's names, etc. And then we've got special category data, which is things like criminal convictions, medical data, etc. And that's the area where you need more than just the contract. There needs to be a compelling reason why you would do that. So what we've done on the alliance contract is say, actually, we're going to trust every single partner to manage that themselves, rather than passing it from partner to partner to partner.
Well, glad to clear that one up. So that's definitely paper number 2 from today. So these questions, if there's not a good answer or an obvious answer, then we need support. So I think we're the group to do that. So these issues, I think we take offline and put together a paper, discussions in the group to really develop this. It's definitely an issue, and there's no simple, straightforward answer. Okay, question 5, contra charges. Here's an example. A contractor instructs a subcontractor to do some work with good notice. They are obliged to follow an instruction as the type of work they're doing on that project. Completion date and associated delay damages is still 3 months away. For whatever reason, the subcontractor doesn't do that work, and this costs the contractor a significant sum of money. Now, let me give an example. I don't know where I get this from. Some people in this room know where I got this from. For example, what recourse they have financially against the subcontractor not doing the CE for money they have incurred as a result. Let's say, in an extreme example, the CE was for £10,000 worth of work, but it's not doing it, stopped, I don't know what project, could have a tunnel boring machine that's running at the moment at a cost of £450,000 a day. So let's get this clear. The subby doesn't do work they should have done, about 10 grand's worth of work, they haven't done it, it stops the tunnel boring machine at £450,000 a day to the contractor. And then there's that little buzzword that contractors use, yeah, we're going to contracharge you. That's not an NEC term. So, that is a thorny issue, and I've not got an answer for this, so I'm really glad the panel's doing this. Okay, how do we deal with this? So, Barry from a practical view, and then Nicola from a legal view. You know, this age-old thing about contracharges, it's not a thing in the contracts. There are things we've got, like key dates and sexual completion, things like that. How do we deal with that, Barry?
How did you get this one, Barry? John's just said to me, suck it up. So. Yeah, I mean, that is the problem, isn't it? That effectively, what are you going to do? I mean, there are contra charges. You often see, of course, you see Z clauses with contra charges floating around in a lot of contracts around. We've got the normal provisions in terms of, you know, effectively if there's delay damages and the like. But it is a problem, isn't it? Because if you, people were talking earlier about back-to-back, if you pass all the risk down to your subcontractors, so you could, I suspect, so hopefully, you know, Nicola's going to cover this off, but basically, yeah, you can pass the risk down to your subcontractor, and they might even sign up. Doesn't mean you're going to get any of that, because if they go bankrupt or go under from it, you're going to be in no better position. So I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? Is it something as a main contractor that, you know, I always say, you know, first, the reason I have a contractor is to manage their supply chain and their subcontractors. And some of the risks just won't be able to pass down to the subcontractors. It's just not going to be affordable for them to be able to do that. So, from a legal position.
Yeah, I mean, then there would breach of contract, there would potentially be some sort of claim, but what can you do contractually without having to do, have animals for duplication? I was just sharing with Richard, just reminding myself about 25.2. It's not necessarily meant for this type of thing, it might be covered, but it's potentially something you can attempt to try. So I just read that out, the kind of contract provides services and other things are stated in the scope. So if there's been a C, potentially it's change the scope and it's something they're providing under the scope. Any cost incurred by the client as a result of the contractor not providing the services and other things which is provided is assessed by the project manager and paid by the contractor. Now obviously that's the ECC, not the subcontract, but I think we've got the same wording in the subcontract. I know you've got the ECC in front of me. That's a potential option. I'm not sure.
I just said I always, in training I always suggest that's a clause. If the contractor hasn't provided a little widget or hasn't provided the right quality of biscuits in the meeting, it's not really designed for that sort of thing. I don't think, but I'm not a lawyer.
That 450,000 is pounds, not South Korean won.
Yeah.
So how can we expect a subcontract to take on that risk, yet we understand the problem, you're meant to do something and it's caused us a big problem as a contractor. Has anyone got a 30-second from the audience thought on contra charges? Anyone want to say anything about contra charges? Okay, we'll do that over beer. So that is
Glenn, could I just...
Yeah, please do.
Could I just chip in? So I haven't pre-read this, so I'm kind of making it up as I go along. But my thought process went, hang on, an instruction to do additional work, which is an instruction to change the scope. So the scope has changed. Contractor's primary obligation, provide the works in accordance with the scope. Failure to do so is a defect. Failure to correct defect, assess the cost to the contractor of having somebody else correct the defect. After completion. So, it gets you part of the way there, doesn't it? But not all the way there, I'm not sure.
We're setting up contracts with subcontractors. We want to make it an exclusive contract. So you want to put in key dates, you want to put in sexual completions, make sure they understand their deliverables. But how many subcontractors could imagine, well, you know, they might not know that their actions, especially if it's extra works they've been asked to do, is going to stop the tunnel boring machine, and the consequence of that is £450,000. So
We can't possibly expect them to be signing up to that, but at the same time, it has caused the contractor those problems. So it's definitely something, I haven't got the right answer, but it is a problem. How do contractors make sure the subcontractor fulfill their obligations without making it so that they can, any impact of any item
on the programme and you're late on, we will charge you. Think of a contractor. Would a contractor let our client say, any item on your programme you don't do on time, we're going to charge you money? Of course they would. Yet we're kind of doing that with subcontractors. We're saying, no, you've held up another subcontractor and therefore we're going to try and charge you money. That's not what we do as the contractor. So that's what I think we need to discuss further. And maybe at 7 o'clock when you've had 3 beers, then the answers will become clear.
Yeah,
It's a bit late for the early morning, isn't it? The tunnel boring machine stopped. Hopefully a fairly quick one. Question 6 from Steve. I've seen Steve, yeah. Is NEC still appropriate even for large-scale infrastructure projects with ill-defined scope and budget? Let's see if that ever happens. So, Richard, and then I'll come to John. Thoughts on that?
Is it still appropriate? Well, it's more appropriate than any other standard formal contract out there, but it's going to take a lot of work because, you know, if your scope is ill-defined, you're going to be changing your scope every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes is going to be a compensation event, and we all know the hassle with assessing compensation events. So you still need a contract, even if you don't know what your scope is. Obviously, you're going to be better off with an option E. I hope that you're not going to ask the contractor to give you a price for this ill-defined scope. One thing that I always say in training as well, don't say that target contract is okay for an ill-defined scope, because it's not, because there's payment and escape. Therefore, you need to have a defined scope as much for a target as you do for a lump sum, unless your share percentages are all close to 0. So I would say that option E is by far the best contract available for an ill-defined scope. John?
I would say it depends upon 2 things.
Well, so the short answer is yes, but it's how you break the project down into packages and the contract strategy for each package. So you might say, actually, we need a bit of design development on this, and I'm going to pay you, employ you under a professional services contract to do that design development until we get it to a state where the scope is fixed enough to price up or arrive at a meaningful prices. The other thing is you might say, hey, I'll just use X22, the early contractor involvement, with stage 1, which is effectively cost reimbursable, until it reaches a point where it's solid enough, defined enough to be priced up and agree a target. The other thing I would say with scope is I separate scope into 2 dimensions. One is the breadth and one is the depth. The breadth is making sure everything covers the whole of what should be in that package and hasn't got fuzzy edges. And is it in, is it out? Oh, it's out, so we need to add it in, etc. The other thing is the depth of it, the detail of it. Doing a training for one client, they said, define the things which are precious to you, the precious things, right? It needs to be sufficiently detailed that you're getting what you want as a client. Okay, and so that might mean in some areas it's a performance spec for M&E. In other areas, this are a high profile building, actually this is what we want it to look like. So it's that fit for purpose definition depending upon what's important to you as a client. Okay. And it can vary.
Steve, thoughts? So, project that I referred to did have an ECI, but we're now a building without seal scope. Very difficult to write a program for a job I don't know what the scope is. Again, discussed here the importance of having a baseline program.
That tells me that you entered the target cost phase at stage 2 too early.
But the other thing, of course, the impact part of what's happening at the end of that program.
But the only way to get away from that is to build in staged assumptions in that scope, so that both sides of it at least can program it based on whatever we've assumed in the scope. Even if the assumption in the scope is it's a widget which costs 10 grand and is going to take 3 weeks, at least you can put that in your program, you can put that in your price. When it changes, you've then got compensation of it. We used to call them provisional sums, but don't tell anybody about that.
If I slice that to get into the issue, you've got a little bit here.
Yeah.
Or try to say that and show us those bits. So yeah, I think it can be right, but I just think it is, as debated I was here, that non-definition is really unhelpful in
The client and the client's boss need to know that it's a nightmare waiting to happen, don't they? But
we can tell him that big.
Okay. We don't always have time for this, but we do today. Bearing in mind, the bar does not open until 5:15. So if you don't ask any questions, it's of no help to you to get to the bar earlier. So, any questions for anyone? Nathan, we'll take one at the front here, particularly key. So, okay, yep, fire away. You got. So, if we direct this to any panel member of your choice.
I'm a young-ish professional working on 4 NEC contracts now as a project manager. And the common thread I've seen on each one is the client introducing non-contractual covenants. For example, restricting the level or the amount I can ratify as a CE. In some extreme cases, making the teams review the payment before I can certify. Even saying you can't instruct under 61.1, it has to be under 61.2. 2 questions. For the project managers in the room, is this common or have I been unlucky? And for lawyers, where does this leave the liability for the project manager?
Good question. Just so in terms of commonality, it's governance is one of my will be around to future events, okay? Where people seem to think that good governance means that someone up there can only make a decision, and what it does is it paralyses the site. And the worst thing you can do often in project management is not make a decision, and you just get this sort of backlog of unresolved issues, which result in further reports, etc., and so on. The other thing that I've seen, and Nicola might confirm this, is the reference to how can the project manager be impartial if they're having to refer back to the client, and that put as the background leading up to the adjudication.
I think that argument is a valid one, but it's often a very difficult one to run and to prove. Is the governance written into the contract?
No, completely out of contract, or it's been brought in post-contract. And I've seen this across multiple clients now, mostly all public sector.
And in terms of, so you're not acting as an external sort of project manager?
The NEC project manager.
Right, okay, so there's no sort of separate contractual obligation. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult one because the project manager doesn't necessarily have a liability under contract. It's sort of it's not a party to the contract. So if the project manager is acting in that way, it can be quite a difficult position legally. So, but yeah, if there are certain things that are delaying things, that's going to cause all kinds of compensation events. It's going to have an impact. It may not necessarily be directly a sort of a liability to the NEC project manager itself. It may be to the actions of the employer. So it could be the employer or the client actually penalising themselves there.
Because it comes back to Neil's presentation the other day, doesn't it? Because you've got a client. We've heard from Neil what we all know in this room, that the PM is required to be independent. And the client's now saying you've got to get your CD assessments checked by me before you assess them. So your client is effectively telling you to break the law. Are they not? Or is that a bit too simplistic?
It's a difficult one. Because the project manager is impartial, but sort of they have an impartial hand, but they're engaged by the employer, so they're not a party to the. But they, they're not
a party to the contract, but they have an obligation to the client to do things properly.
and that involves being impartial. It's a real
That's the issue. Their obligation is to the client, not the contractor. So it's a bit of
breach of their appointment with their client.
That's what I was about to say, Barry, is the project managers on a very sticky wicket, because the client could turn around and say, well, you're negligent, and sue the project manager. So the project manager should do it right. Equally, if you're the contractor, use the provisions in the contract to force it to a conclusion. Use the reminder notification process to bounce things through the process. Couldn't care less about their governance. You signed the contract to say it will apply in this timescale.
It's interesting why the client wants to let that happen, because they're endorsing someone to act on their behalf who's not acting in their interests, and could lead to disputes that they will lose, and then not only have to pay the difference but also have to pay the adjudication costs as well. So again, that's that Einstein's definition of insanity, I think, creeping in there.
And it goes back to that old the old school of the project managers just in the invoice or the client's pocket. So, I mean, it's just proving that theory.
But I mean, it's such an important thing. I mean, I was in Singapore recently, and the same issue. They're worried about implementing NEC in Singapore, where I go and say 62.3 PM makes a decision within 2 weeks, and they just laugh at me. Don't be ridiculous, because it's got to go through 3 tiers of management. Just put your hand up in the room if that's the way it is in your jobs. If you have to go through client management to get signed, quite a few hands going up. It's a fascinating issue.
Should have committed.
I don't know the answer to it at all.
I think project managers need to educate their clients as well, to protect themselves. And equally, it's not a very sensible system to have. You know, in the days when I was much closer to projects than I am, you'd have a budget signed off for a job, and the project manager would have authority to spend within the budget. Then, if things are going on with budget, you forecast, you go back, you get an increase to your budget. You don't do it on a CE by CE basis. That's silly.
When it begs the question, why have a project manager if you don't let them project manage?
Well,
there's some limits of responsibility in terms of, levels of authority in terms of being able to agree or assess things. What's the point? I mean, both Richard, when we used to training class with a client, I always said, what fantastic, I'm a PA, I've got no authority to do anything, I've got to refer everything to somebody else. And that just disappears into a big black hole. So you could look like that, I'm not performing as a PA. But actually I can't do anything because my appointment says I have to wait for that to come back. So I'm just making a recommendation.
I'll fit that under the heading of why have a dog and bark yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great question, thank you. Question, Nicola?
My first question is...
Rise the microphone, there's no problem with that. So Nathan, can we take that one over there?
Hello? I think it's okay. So, building on the question before around entering into stage 2 too early from the ECI phase, if the contractor proposes, and I'm guessing the contractor would in this scenario where things are uncertain going into stage 2, he would propose a kind of employer's risk schedule that the employer signs up to going into stage 2 too early. Can that employer's risk schedule be used as a pricing document when they're in stage 2?
I was going to ask the question earlier today. We talked a little bit about ECI and the changes to it in the January 2023 changes. What the ECI doesn't allow you to do is to change other elements of the contract data. It allows you to do access dates. My Z clause to X22 allows some entries in the contract data to say, as agreed by the parties in stage 1. And the obvious one that should be that is additional compensations. And therefore, in stage 1, if the contractor comes with a rational argument to bring the prices down by adding a compensation then we've got a nice tool to do that in the new NEC4 additional compensation events are. So I think you should include that within X22, but it's not there at the moment.
Absolutely not bad, mate.
So can the contractor use the employer's risk?
Well, the only way you could do that with X22 as it is in the book, you would have to go to an addendum between stage 1 and stage 2 to allow the parties to add in additional accommodation events, which is why I say in a nice, polite, gentle way, I think that's bloody stupid, because I think that should be allowed within X22 generally. Surely it's common sense in stage 1 for the parties to be able to agree to take money out of the prices by taking a particular risk out exactly as you're talking about.
And that could be stated in the notice to proceed.
Yeah, in the notice, so in the way I zed it, is that, like I say, I think what I've done in X22 is have, and I'm not sure from a legal perspective whether this is allowed, but effectively allow the contract data to either be stated now at the tender award stage for stage 1, or to say to be agreed by the parties in stage 1. That opens up obviously a lot more flexibility, but you can decide when you write that contract data which elements you want the parties to have the chance to change during stage 1.
So could you say in this scenario that the employer's works information takes precedence over the contractor's works information?
That's a completely separate issue, and the answer is yes, because of 60.11 second bullet point and all that sort of stuff. So the scope the client scope, brackets client scope, will always take precedence over the contractor scope. Interesting, that's another thing in the recent change in X22. A line was taken out saying that the contractor's work during stage 1 becomes scope provided by the contractor for its design when we move to stage 2. And most of us that have done ECI, I think that's probably quite logical. But again, that's up for you to decide within the parties. The whole ECI thing, just put a hand up, how many people have been involved in an ECI project? You see, it's becoming more and more standard and more normal, and all of us are having to do a lot of learning with it. Sorry.
I think the employer needs to refine their scope more.
Say again?
I think it's easier for the employer to refine their scope and go into a different type of contract rather than a option C.
Again, the standard is option C because most of us have got open book, we think option C. I'm sure people in the room have heard that some clients would rather, after all that thinking, go to an option A. And it's not, I've never done it personally, but it's not difficult to change X22 such as stage 2 is option A.
And there's a recent example, a case study, where that was the case, don't know the details. And if you think where ECI came from, part of its origins come from the preferred contractor route, where essentially a big developer works with 3 contractors. It's your turn now. The big developer knows what they want and how much things should cost. The contractor knows that if they rip them off, they're not going to get another job. So they work together to agree a scope which is sufficiently defined for a decent price. The difference with ECI under option A, if you like, and as Richard says, you would need to make a few tweaks to the amendment, is rather than, if you like, the contractor's early contractor involvement being paid for directly, it's sort of, you've got to win the job to get the money, but the money's still in there once they enter stage 2 effectively. So I don't see any, in the right circumstances, I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, and sorry.
I think that's another paper, we're not going to write it.
Yeah, talking about option A though, and open book, and this goes back to a presentation earlier. If you have an agreed schedule of rates, then and you go ahead and do an audit, and you conclude that after the audit the rates are considerably lower than what you agreed in the schedule.
Oh dear.
Then, yeah. What's the point of the audit?
Option A in open book doesn't work. Whenever I often see a Z clause added in about open book, and it's option A. What are you expecting to do with that? Because if the contractor can demonstrate they've lost money, then of course the client's going to pay them extra. No. So why do they want the cake and eat it? So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. The only time they could come into play is if you've got a compensation event that is based on actual cost, which isn't much. So most compensations have been forecast, we talked about that. Things like weather, if a weather delay, you'll only know after the event. So, okay, you will be looking at actual cost basis there, but that's the only time that it could come into play. But obviously, disallow costs and the open book approach element, that's not for option A or option B. So, okay, I'm glad we squeezed at least a couple of questions in extra this year. We squeezed those in. But just to close out today's workshop, once again, a massive thank you to the sponsors. They're still knocking around, so you can still chat to them.
So a big thank you to Colonel Gates, our lead sponsor, and all of the other sponsors that have made this event such a good event and free to you as delegates. And thank you to the attendees. Made this an enjoyable session. Lots of good debates, lots of good chats in the breaks and such like. So it's been a very enlightening, good vibe, good energy in the room today. It's still 5 o'clock and you're all still awake. I don't know if that's because the aircon, that's maybe helping with that, but a big thank you for making this such an event. So, what's next for our LinkedIn NEC People group? Well, use the group even more to post discussions. Some of those debates we just had, we could be discussing them in the LinkedIn group and maybe generate, papers off the back of them. Ensure the level of understanding amongst your own staff, organisations along the supply chain is continually improving. That old adage, every day is a school day. So make sure within your organisations you are continuing to develop and bring everyone else around you. So contractors, I need to educate clients as well as subcontractors as well. So what's next, medium term for the group? Well, following on today, give us feedback within the group as to your thoughts, experience of the conference within LinkedIn, the NEC People group. So we'll post something in the morning. If you were here today, drop a message, not because we just want to hear, oh, it was amazing. Just tell us genuinely. Or tell the group, how you found today, what was your biggest takeaway. So make a point in logging in tomorrow and just giving a bit of feedback. Watch out for announcements within the group to when the videos from today are available. Dabby's ready in the morning? Morning. No, apparently a couple of weeks. We'll give him a little bit of time for editing. And you've got a bit more work to edit out Richard's ranting and cursing and such like. So a bit more editing than normal. Tickle. So what's next? Short term? Well, that's my favourite picture. As much as I love this event, I quite like this bit. And the bar is open. It is free, so don't worry about going there. Oh God, I don't want to be first. I'll get a big round in.